We're at Xmo Garage just outside Exeter, and this, as everybody in the industry knows, is a main ID sign, otherwise known as a mid sign. Now this garage is undergoing a major refurbishment, and one of the things that's going to happen today is that mid sign is going to be replaced. Now, in the course of this video, we can't tell you how to do that. We can't even give you all the health and safety issues that you are likely to encounter in a project of this sort. And just to put that in some sort of perspective, the Xmo Strata crews who do this regularly go on a 4-day course to qualify under the National Plant Operators Registration Scheme, and that only covers them for part of what we're talking about today. But what perhaps we can do is to identify some of the key health and safety issues and perhaps give you some ideas as to how to do the job more safely and more effectively. Safety is an attitude of mind. It's not all about checklists and processes, though they are, of course, critical.
Both this sign and the one replacing it weigh approximately a tonne, so we take the process very seriously. What we're trying to do here is bring some innovation to the process to reduce the risk.
Before you even arrive on site, you're going to be checking the weather. Now, you can do that obviously on television or radio, and clearly on a site like this, which is so exposed, it's even more important. And it's not just the weather, it's beautiful on a day like this, cold and sunny. It's also the wind speed, and for that you need one of these. Now, this is currently registering 2.3 miles an hour, which is absolutely fine. If it was registering more than 24 miles an hour, we wouldn't be able to do the job. So you've checked the weather and you've checked the wind speed. The next thing to check is your personal protective equipment. Let me introduce Stuart, who's our electrician here today, and he's wearing all the gear that he needs to wear for this job, and that includes the helmet, the eye protectors, the ear protectors here, the high-vis jacket, the gloves, and the safety and non-slip boots.
We use a checklist prior to both working at height and prior to using a mobile crane. And both of the checklists are specifically designed to discuss any hazards involved in that process and encourage the teams to discuss them and identify solutions to any hazards identified. The clearance certificate is a document that we use to encourage our guys to talk about the work they're doing on the site with the site owner and encourage two-way discussion about the hazards we may create for him and the hazards that we may encounter that he's aware of. And typically that could be another contractor coming onto site, or it could be a tanker delivery that's expected.
Now, the first work to be done on the sign itself will be the electrical work to make sure it isn't live. Xmo Strata insists that all of this work is done by NIC, EIC qualified electricians. Now, we can't go through all of the electrical issues here, but the important thing, the essential thing, is to identify the circuits that are live in here and then lock out, tag out and test. Now, what about that board? Well, in a professionally run site like this one, it's likely to be accurate, but you never assume that, and certainly in the thousands of forecourts in the UK, these guys tell me they come across many where the information given bears no relation to the truth at all. So once again, identify the circuits, lock out, tag out and check. Central to everything we're doing today is this document called a lift plan. Just tell us about that.
Basically, it's try and capture every hazard there may be in the lift, and a qualified person would note down and do a drawing of all the actions they're going to take during the lift, and so everybody involved in the lift is well aware of what they have to do and what's expected of them.
And as you say, this is actually drawn out. It's quite a detailed document, isn't it?
It is indeed, yes.
The lift plan has to be drawn up with the involvement of somebody who has a certificate from the National Plant Operators Registration Scheme. Who within Xmo Strata has that certificate?
Well, all the appropriate people, including our supervisors who are going to be involved in the lift. The only person that can actually draw up that lift plan is the suitably qualified person.
So then you can set about taking the old sign down, fixing the lifting equipment and the crane jib to the appropriate place for the lift. So let's go back to that lift plan. The lift plan will also include a calculation about the weight being lifted and whether the crane can take it. You need to know the crane's lifting limits and be sure that it can safely put the sign where you need it. Now you need to be really careful where you position the crane. It can't be on soft ground, it can't be on uneven ground, it can't be on gravel. And you need to look very carefully at the lifting arc. Now, there's no point in us putting a crane here, but it's a good illustration of the kind of problems that you may encounter. If you had to put a crane here, just look at the problems you contend with. You've got a pole over here, you have trees behind me, you've got a telegraph pole behind me, and you've got overhead wires. And on that subject, just think really carefully about overhead power lines. You don't even have to touch those. Just get within the proximity of them, just get close to them, and electricity can arc from the power lines straight into the jib. Now, you're always going to barrier off the area that you're working in. But remember, it's Xmo Strata's policy to use the vans in the barrier as well. That's why they've got these reflective safety markings to make them highly visible in that situation.
We have direct experience of using a van that's been impacted by a vehicle that would have actually probably killed somebody who was working behind it.
Now, before you can lift anything off the back of a truck, you have to test all the equipment that you're using and know that it has been officially tested. And I know that when this load arrived this morning from Germany, you weren't happy with the way it was loaded, were you? Just talk to us about that and explain what you've done as a temporary fix there.
Yeah, we certainly weren't. When we came along, we found a metal frame lifting device on there, which was supporting it also in transit, but it's a lifting device. We couldn't be certain it had been tested. We couldn't be sure it was suitable. So we've actually removed it, and we've put the lifting eyes, the pink lifting eyes, as you see here. We put them directly into the sign frame, which we now know is going to be safe.
Okay, and you've got this temporary wooden block on there, which
Yes.
I know you regard as a very temporary fix.
Absolutely. We just want to keep the sign clear of the bed of the vehicle. We don't want to scratch it. So that is purely there just to support the sign, just while we're manoeuvring it around the premises here.
Okay, but if that was going off on the road, you wouldn't be happy with that?
We wouldn't use it for transport.
No. Okay. Now, tell us about this documentation, because there is quite a lot of it, isn't there?
There is a lot of documentation, and people are always moaning about documentation, aren't they? But it's all very, very necessary. Everything here, because of the Lola regulations, has to be tested annually.
Now, Lola, we'd better tell people what that is, and even I'm going to have to read this out, I'm afraid. It's the Lifting Operation and Lifting Equipment Regulations.
That's
is that
right.
right? Okay.
I'm glad you got it written down.
Okay.
Yes, everything is tested annually. We insist that it's tested every 6 months, just to make sure they have a hard life.
So the requirement is annually for the
Yes.
type of work that you're doing,
Yes.
but the Xmo Strata rules are every 6 months.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
If you're lifting people, of course, it's a slightly different regulation. It's every 6 months rather than annually.
Okay, right.
Yeah. For example, these lifting eyes, they're pink, beautiful colour, but they're pink for a reason. Therefore, they're special lifting eyes that enable us to lift through an arc. Mostly when you're lifting vertically, but we have to, as you can see with the sign here, we're actually lifting through an arc, and they have to be able to take that extra strain, and these do.
And I know that it's quite common for you, isn't it, to find, again, when a truck arrives from another company, that you don't have the right type of lifting eye.
Absolutely, it's more common than not. We carry these around, our supervisors carry them around, and they actually will swap them over for the correct lifting eye.
So those are also tested on a regular basis, but you also want people to do a visual test before they use
Absolutely.
them.
Everything everybody uses has to be visually tested. For example, these lifting struts, again, they have to be tested every 6 months. We have, or every year, but we do it 6 monthly. We have the test certificates there. And also the guys would check for cuts, tears, or any other damage to these struts before they use them every time.
And if there is any damage, they're just not used.
Don't use them at all. And the same goes for shackles. They have to be tested, but we also do a visual check. And that way we stay safe.
So you've lifted the old unit clear and you need to replace it with this brand new one. But just before you do that, Xmo Strata crews always visually inspect the base to make sure that it looks safe. Now, okay, they're not construction engineers and you can only see part of it, so you've no idea whether it's the correct depth for a sign of this size, for example. But if it's already had a sign on it for some years and there's anything wrong, you may be able to spot it. Crumbling concrete, for example, cracks or other damage could indicate problems, and a visual check only takes a few seconds. Well, the base has been given the all clear, so now we need to think about lifting the new sign into position. Now, when a mid-sign arrives on site, it's going to be loaded pretty much like this. And the problem is how you're going to get it off the truck onto the site. And it's an issue that's fraught with difficulty. There's a traditional way of doing it, but Xmo Strata believes it has a safer way of doing it and that it's brought some innovation to bear. And in order to explain that, we need to go to the classroom. Now, it may not look like it, but that represents our mid-sign, and for obvious reasons to do with the shape and dimensions of the thing, a mid-sign will usually arrive horizontally on a vehicle like so. And the traditional way of lifting off the vehicle involves the crane lifting and dragging like that. And the problem comes there when you have uncontrolled swinging, which has to be controlled by a linesman, which again is obviously not ideal. Now, Kevin Cully, an area supervisor with Xmo Strata, has come up with a different way of doing this. It's very simple, and the simple plans are best. And Kevin's idea is that you pivot the sign like so, and only then do you lift it. And as you can see, even on this simple model, there's an awful lot less swinging about, which is safer for everybody. The one thing you do have to be careful about is where you put the weight of this, particularly on a smaller vehicle, and you need to work with the truck driver so that you don't end up with a different type of problem. Now, as you heard earlier, Dave Heathorn wasn't really very happy about the way this mid-sign had been loaded when it arrived on a different vehicle a little while ago. It's now been moved onto this Xmo Strata vehicle, and you'll notice that it has this edge protection here, and that's so that it's less likely that people will actually fall off. Now, it's Xmo Strata's very strong preference that the vehicles it uses regularly do have these edge protection barriers. But that may be beyond your control. If it's a transport company, if it's a manufacturer delivering an item of equipment, it simply may not have that. And if it doesn't, it's just something else you have to take into consideration in your risk assessment. Now, you'll already have cleared the studs, inspecting them for damage in the process and removing any surface rust or other dirt, probably with a wire brush. One of the cardinal rules is that you never work under a suspended load. Even the crane operator nowadays can be clear of the danger area and operate the crane remotely. Now, as you can see, the sign has now been pivoted, just as it was with our little model, and the crane lifts the sign with very little swinging, and the sign is now positioned over the base. Now, the base is of a different size to the root cage in the ground in this case, so adapter plates are used and fitted prior to lifting in to minimise manual handling. Now, remember, at this point the bolts need to be fully engaged, which means you really should have 2 or 3 threads showing clear. You'll also be using a spirit level to ensure that you fit the mid-sign upright, because even if the base was fitted with precision, it may have settled since then. Once it's all secured, the electrician can get to work wiring up the new sign. So there you are, a bit of tidying up to do, but a professionally replaced mid-sign. Now, we said right at the very beginning of this program that this isn't a substitute for a comprehensive training program, and we certainly can't hope to identify all the health and safety issues which you might encounter on a project of this type. But whether you work for Xmo Strata or for any other company, we hope it's refreshed your thinking and perhaps taught you something new. So stay safe, join us next time. For those of us here on site, there's only one job left to do. So let's turn the lights on.